Thom Hartmann here with you, and super pleased to have back with us Dr. Diane Ravitch. It's been some time. Historian of education, research professor of education at New York University, co-founder of the Network for Public Education, Citizen Secretary of Education in the at shadowingtrump.org, founded by Mark Green, my old boss at Air America. Author, editor of 24 books, including Reign of Error, The Hoax of the Privatization Movement and the Danger to America's Public Schools. The website's shadowingtrump.org, and Diane Ravitch, RAVITCH.com. Dr. Ravitch, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you, Tom.
Thank you so much.
Crucial days.
Yeah, this is a really critical time. There is a lot going on here. First of all, I understand that, well, first of all, you recently published a piece. I saw it over at Alternet. The headline was Diane Ravitch urges boycotting of standardized tests, saying they do nothing for kids but make testing companies rich. If I could just very quickly tell you a little story. I used to live in Vermont, and when I was in 2001, I think it was, or maybe 2000, I was working on a book called Unequal Protection. And Jim Jeffords had just pulled out of the, must have been 2001, had just pulled out of the Republican Party over education policy, over Bush's education policy. And I met with him and with his chief of staff, and they shared with me a report by the Congressional Service that does reports just for senators about what would the impact of standardized testing be. And the bottom line, as he told me, was that it would turn a $400 million a year industry into a $2 billion a year industry, period. And he was aware that the president's brother owned one of these standardized testing companies, and he was just horrified by it. So with that setup, let me toss it to you. What's going on?
Well, you know, years ago, we didn't have every child taking a test, a standardized test every year. There is no other nation in the world that requires every child between third grade and eighth grade to take a standardized test every year. And what's happened is, since the passage of No Child Left Behind during the second Bush administration, and that was in 2002 that it was adopted, this has been the routine in American schools, and the standardized tests have consumed education, because most schools now are spending weeks and weeks taking interim assessments, test prep, preparing for the test. And so all these weeks, and in some cases months, are lost to the standardized test. And if you think about the nature of a standardized test, they give you four options. They say, which is the correct answer? Now, I was on the National Testing Board, which is called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And I reviewed test questions, and I can't tell you how many times I saw test questions that had the wrong answer, or they had two right answers, or they had no right answer. And a thoughtful student might look at this and puzzle over it and pick the wrong answer because they thought too hard about it. Why would we want to subject our kids to weeks and weeks preparing for these useless tests? The reason they're useless, and people think that they provide so much information, they provide no information at all. By the time the results come back, usually in August or September, the child is already in a different teacher's class, and then the report says your child passed, your child failed, your child is a 43 or a 62. That's not information. Information would be if you could sit down and say, here are the questions you missed. Let's see why you missed it, and what did you get wrong? Let's review what you got right. You're not even allowed to, the teachers are not allowed to discuss the test questions with the students, and the students are not allowed to discuss them either.
Was Senator Jim Jeffords right that the only reason that they were seriously considering doing this back then was because it was because of lobbying from an industry that was going to make billions?
Absolutely. And when during that time in the early 2000s and the late 90s, when I was on the Federal Testing Board, there were testing lobbyists all over the federal government and all over the state legislatures, and they would be there to make sure that their contracts kept growing and getting larger. So they're the only beneficiaries. There's no benefit to the students or the teachers.
That's amazing.
In fact, it really has become a club to beat students and teachers with by saying, you're a failing teacher, you're a failing school, you're a failing child, and what we need is more tests. Yeah. And so there are states like Texas, they were spending $500 million a year on testing. This is crazy.
Yeah, you know, when I was a kid, the teachers would run them off on the Mimeo machine, you know, or handwrite them,
right.
and yeah.
Well, or they'd just give you their own test questions, because they would test what they taught to you, and that's what a test should be. Is the teacher should test what was taught, not you should have to figure out the questions that somebody in England or somebody in a corporate headquarters has decided you should be asked.
Amen. Amen. It is May Day, and Betsy DeVos is visiting a charter school in California tomorrow.
Well, actually, she canceled.
Oh, she did?
I got the notice that she was visiting the Arnold Schwarzenegger Charter School in Woodland Hills, California, and it only came out yesterday that she was going there. And then by 6 p.m. yesterday, a notice went out saying, sorry, she had to cancel she has an unexpected scheduling conflict.
Could that,
I never heard of that.
Could that have to do with the study that just came out in the last couple of days? And I'm sorry, I don't have the details on it. I heard it, I believe, on the radio, that showed that nationwide charter schools and voucher programs are actually underperforming just good old-fashioned normal public schools.
Well, I don't think so. I think it probably had to do with some of the big funders of charters in Los Angeles, like the billionaire Eli Broad and the billionaire Reed Hastings, who owns Netflix. These guys have a big election coming up where they're trying to grab control of the Los Angeles School Board, which will allow them to get more charter schools. And they may have realized that having Betsy DeVos in only a week or so before this crucial election might be a really bad thing for their candidate, because they want to pretend to be Democrats when in fact here is Trump's Secretary of Education saying, yes, we need to take more public schools and turn them over to private operators. And I think for them it was probably bad timing, and they may have asked her not to come after the school board election.
That makes a lot of sense. What is the state of public education right now, and what kind of damage has the school voucher movement done to it, and is it continuing to move forward, or is it starting to slide backwards?
Well, it's a mixed picture. It's certainly very bad news to have Donald Trump in the presidency and to have Betsy DeVos as Secretary of Education. She is the first secretary in the history of the department, or even what preceded the department, to be actively hostile to public education. We've never had a secretary, even though we've had secretaries like Bill Bennett and Lamar Alexander. They supported choice, but they were never hostile to public schools. She is actively hostile to public schools. And wherever she goes, all she can talk about is school choice, by which she means taking public money and handing it over to either religious schools or having some kind of the voucher movement doesn't like to say vouchers. They like to say things like tax credits or education savings accounts. And so we now have about half the states that have passed legislation to allow corporations to get tax credits if they give to a fund to provide scholarship for kids to go to religious school. So the state loses the tax money, and the money, instead of going into the state treasury to support things like public education, goes to kids to go to religious schools. What we've learned in recent years is that the states that have vouchers are seeing that kids are actually falling behind, and that includes Ohio, Louisiana, and Indiana. And the most recent voucher study was in D.C., where they've had a voucher program congressionally authorized since 2004. And the kids there who are low performing to begin with, when they get a voucher and go to a religious school, they actually lose ground. So they go from low performing to lower performing. And Betsy DeVos responded to these results by saying that doesn't matter, because when everyone has choice, all three sectors, the charters, the vouchers, and public schools, will get the same results. Well, this represents a major, major change for the school choice movement, because in the past they've always said if parents choose the school, the kids will get higher scores. But it turns out that they don't get higher scores. They actually get lower scores. So can you imagine honest advertising saying, if you take your voucher and go to a religious school, your child's scores will actually go down?
Yeah.
No, they'll never say that. But she admitted it, and in a comment to the Washington Post, she did not expect kids' scores to get better. She just believes in choice for the sake of choice.
Now, it's not just religious schools, too. It's also these for-profit so-called academies, these basically for-profit charter schools. Are they doing even worse than the religious schools, or the same, or is it,
Well, the best evidence comes from Michigan, which is DeVos' state. Michigan has hundreds of charter schools. 80% of them are run by for-profit entrepreneurs. And a study by the Detroit Free Press said that charter schools do worse than the public schools. And Detroit is now flooded with charter schools, and Detroit is the lowest performing city in the entire country. So the other thing that happened in Michigan I think is really significant is since it went overboard for choice, its standing in the national testing went from the middle of the pack to the bottom of the pack. Michigan is down there with the impoverished southern states now. And this is just since they've gone into wiping out district lines and having public schools compete for the same students and having public schools and charter schools competing. They don't have vouchers because DeVos tried to push through a voucher referendum in the year 2000. She and her husband got one on the ballot, and it was defeated by the people of Michigan by a vote of 69-31. So that's unusual because in a lot of other states, they've also been defeated, and then the governors and legislatures in these red states have found workarounds like tax credits and other kinds of phony things to make sure that kids can go to really low-quality private schools and low-quality religious schools. They're not going to the great private schools that get remarkable results because the tuition in those places is $40,000 to $50,000 a year.
Right.
Instead, they're getting a voucher worth about $5,000 or $6,000.
Right. We're talking with Dr. Diane Ravitch. Dr. Ravitch, we only have about 30 seconds left. I'm curious, what can people who care about this issue do? Where can they go? What should we do?
The first place to go is to go online and look for Network for Public Education. And what we have is a lot of resources to explain what the issues are and to tell you how to find a way to connect with the grassroots group in your community or your state and get connected and fight back, because public education right now is in an existential crisis. There are people out to monetize it and privatize it, and this is bad for democracy and bad for all of us.
Yeah. And bad for our next generation. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible thing.
Absolutely.
Dr. Diane Ravitch, you are doing some of the greatest work out there. I am such a fan of your work. Thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom. Bye-bye.
Great talking with you.